In the vast expanse of the nature reserve, a lion cub eagerly played and explored. His golden fur glistened in the bright sunshine, and his curious eyes scanned every nook and cranny in search of adventure. The cub's mother, a majestic lioness with a splendorous mane, watched from a safe distance, allowing her little one to enjoy the freedom. As the cub ran and jumped, his mother was momentarily distracted by a group of birds flitting nearby. The cub, seizing the opportunity, wandered considerably away from his mother, lured by curiosity and the excitement of discovering new territory. His nimble paws led him to an imposing tree, its gnarled trunk and high branches challenging him to climb. With small but determined claws, he ascended, driven by the thrill of discovery. Each stride took him higher. The breeze ruffled his fur and the world beneath him became small and distant. But when he wanted to descend, his hind legs slipped. Vertigo gripped his little body and, with no time to react, he fell. The lioness, who had noticed some time ago that her son was not among the cubs in the pride, had begun to search desperately for him. After a while of searching, the lioness seemed to have given up, since it was not the first time that a cub had disappeared from one moment to the next. The impact was brutal. His side hit first. The air escaped from his lungs in a choked gasp. Then, a stabbing pain shot through him. He tried to sit up, but his hind leg refused to respond. His vision blurred, and fear, a fear he had never felt before, enveloped him completely. The moans of pain were what alerted his mother, a plaintive wail that split the air, reaching the lioness' ears like a fierce blow. Her instinct led her to him in an instant, and finding him there, helpless, her world shattered. The cub was badly hurt, and his piercing whimpers echoed through the reserve. His mother, hearing her little one's cries, ran to him with a speed and determination that only a mother can have. Arriving at her cub's side, the lioness was met with a desolate sight. The little lion lay on the ground, his fur stained with blood and his body trembling with pain. The lioness approached her cub, sniffing and licking it gently. However, as the minutes passed, the cub's pain did not subside, and the lioness became desperate. She began to roar, her powerful, anguished voice echoing through the reserve. The other animals became frightened at the sound of the lioness's roar, and hid in their hiding places. The lioness remembered that there was a group of men who regularly brought them food. Although she had never interacted with them, she knew they were friendly and could help her. She made a brave decision and approached her cub, took it gently in her mouth, and started walking towards the place where she knew she would find the men. The lioness, with her wounded cub in her mouth, advanced with heavy, determined steps toward the group of men, whom, in her instinct, she considered her only hope. The creature between her jaws trembled feebly, barely aware of her surrounding. Dust rose around it, with every footstep, and the desperate beating of its heart echoed in its chest. The journey was long and exhausting. The lioness felt the weight of her son not only in her jaw, but in her soul. With each step, her body tensed, as if the fear of not making it in time pushed her onward. The parched earth burned beneath her paws, and the hot wind brought with it the scent of dry brush and the distant presence of other animals watching her from the shadows. Every now and then, she stopped, not out of exhaustion, but out of the need to make sure her cub was still breathing. She would gently put it down, sniff it desperately, looking for any sign of movement. Sometimes, a slight spasm in her paws or a small sigh would urge her to continue. At other times, the silence terrified her. With renewed urgency, she would pick it up again and move forward, her breath heavy and ragged. The terrain was not easy. She crossed thickets that scratched her skin, negotiated thick roots, and jumped over small gullies with the agility her concern still allowed her. In the distance, the sun was beginning to descend, tinting the sky with reddish tones that made his mission even more pressing. He could not afford darkness. She knew that with the night would come the scavengers, the predators, those who would not hesitate to snatch her cub if they found it vulnerable. Her breathing became more agitated when she sensed the presence of humans nearby. Her instinct told her to fear, to turn around and look for another alternative, but her mother's heart clung to the only chance to save her son. She redoubled her pace, leaving behind her last reserve of energy, ignoring the pain in her muscles and the dryness in her throat. She knew it was coming, could smell them, hear them, and only hoped her risky decision was not in vain. The lioness, with her wounded cub in her mouth, advanced with heavy, determined steps toward the group of men, whom, in her instinct, she considered her only hope. The creature between her jaws trembled feebly, barely aware of her surroundings. Dust rose around it, with every footstep, and the desperate beating of its heart echoed in its chest. The reserve workers, going about their daily routine, were quick to notice the unusual apparition. The lioness, who normally kept her distance, now approached in a reckless manner, showing no aggression, but a latent fear and a silent plea in her gaze. Gary was the first to grasp the situation. His experienced eyes roamed over the lioness's figure, and stopped on the small inert body hanging from her mouth. A shiver ran down his spine. With calculated serenity, he advanced a few steps, without sudden movements, without invading too much of the distressed mother's space. His companions stood ready, some with tranquilizer darts in case the situation became dangerous. But Gary held up a hand firmly, indicating that this was not the time to act rashly. The lioness, still with her cub in her mouth, hesitated for a moment. Her instincts compelled her to be wary, but the pain of her cub outweighed any ancestral fear. Slowly, with almost reverential precision, she laid the little one's body on the ground. His golden eyes were fixed on Gary, in a gesture that, while not human, conveyed an undeniable plea. The group of workers rushed into action. Gary knelt down beside the puppy, and, as carefully as possible, ran his hands over the small body, feeling the trembling that shook it. The soft fur was matted with blood and dirt. One of its hind legs had an obvious kink, and the right side showed a gaping wound, where the skin had torn upon impact with the ground. Every move was critical. They knew that any mistake could cost the puppy its life, and moreover, arouse the fury of the mother, who watched with a mixture of anxiety and tension. One of the employees brought a first aid kit, while another prepared a makeshift stretcher. The little boy was panting. Every breath was an effort, and his whole body was shaking with pain. Gary took a gauze pad and soaked it with disinfectant. As soon as the liquid touched the wound, the cub spasmed and a choked whimper escaped his muzzle. The lioness roared, a guttural, warning-laden sound. The workers stopped immediately. Gary looked up and saw the mother with muscles straining, claws half sunk into the earth. With a deep sigh, the man stepped back slightly, giving the lioness a moment to see that her son was still alive. There was no malice in his actions, only a willingness to help. The mother, eyes fixed on her cub, seemed to understand. She did not attack. She did not run away. She simply waited. The team resumed their work with extreme caution. They fought against time and the fragility of the little life in their hands. They cleaned the wounds as carefully as possible, removing the dirt that threatened to infect the exposed flesh. Each touch generated a slight spasm, a barely audible whimper, but the cub was no longer struggling. Its energy was rapidly being consumed. The lioness's breathing became faster and more erratic as they wrapped her cub's body in white bandages. Each layer seemed like a blanket of hope and fear at the same time. They knew his mother would not let them take the cub without resistance, so they worked right there on the dusty plain, with the lioness less than a meter away, watching their every move. One of the vets improvised a splint to stabilize the fractured paw. Gary, with almost paternal care, gently rubbed the little lion's head, trying to convey reassurance. The cub reacted slightly, his narrowed eyes fleetingly meeting Gary's before closing again. A trickle of breath escaped from his muzzle, almost imperceptible. The team knew that recovery would not be immediate or easy. There was too much risk of infection, and the pup needed rest. However, they had done what was necessary for him to heal. Now the most difficult decision remained: return him to his mother, or transfer him to the veterinary clinic. Before they could decide, the lioness made the determination for them. With a determined move, she brought her muzzle close to the cub, and, with the same tenderness with which she had brought him in, took him in her jaws. The workers made no attempt to stop her. They knew that although they could help, no place would be safer for the little one than beside his mother. With a final glance toward Gary, the lioness turned and began to walk away, her son wrapped in bandages, and the warmth of her mouth. Her steps were steady, but her body still reflected the tension of worry. The team watched her in silence, realizing that they had witnessed something extraordinary. For the next few days, the Lion Pride stayed close to the areas where the reserve workers usually patrolled. The lioness, though wary by nature, allowed Gary and the others to approach from a distance, observing her cub without interfering with his recovery. The little lion slowly began to improve. Although his paw still needed time to heal completely, he resumed walking, playing and exploring, although this time more cautiously. The lioness, in a gesture that no one had ever seen before, approached with her son to the areas where Gary used to be. She no longer ran away when he arrived. She watched him, as if she recognized in him more than just a guardian of the reserve, an ally she could trust. Over time, the story of the wounded cub and the mother who trusted humans became a legend within the reserve, proof that in a world where nature and man often clashed, there were still moments of connection and mutual understanding. And in those encounters between the roar of the lioness and the patience of a man, a bond was woven that transcended the differences between their worlds. After the experience with the injured cub, the lioness and her pride began to trust the employees of the nature reserve more. Gary, in particular, became a close friend to the lioness and her cub. Whenever Gary visited the pride, the lioness and her cub greeted him enthusiastically. The lioness even began to recognize Gary's vehicle and would approach him when she saw him arrive. One day, Gary decided to take his family to visit the nature reserve. His wife and children were excited to see the animals in their natural habitat. When they arrived at the lion pride, the lioness and her cub approached them. Gary introduced his family to the lioness and her cub, and they were amazed at the closeness and trust the lioness had in Gary. The lioness even allowed Gary's children to pet her and play with her cub. While Gary's family was enjoying the visit, a group of tourists arrived at the nature reserve. They were excited to see the animals, but they were also a bit loud and disruptive. The lioness and her cub became uncomfortable with the presence of the tourists and moved away. Gary noticed the situation and approached the tourists to ask them to be more respectful of the animal. He explained that the lioness and her cub were very sensitive and needed a quiet environment. The tourists apologized and made an effort to be quieter and more respectful. The lioness and her cub, feeling more comfortable, returned to the area where Gary's family was staying. Gary's family's visit was a success, and they left with unforgettable memories of their encounter with the lioness and her cub. The lioness and her cub, for their part, were grateful for the visit and the attention they had received. In the days that followed, the lioness and her cub continued to enjoy the company of Gary and the other employees of the nature reserve. The lioness even began to recognize the employees' vehicles and would approach them when she saw them arrive. The relationship between the lioness and the employees of the nature reserve became one of the closest and most respectful the reserve had ever seen. The lioness and her cub felt safe and secure, and the employees were grateful for the opportunity to work with these magnificent animals. And so the story of the lioness and her cub became one of the most inspiring and moving stories in the nature reserve. A story that demonstrated the importance of trust, respect, and compassion between humans and animals. The lioness and her cub continued to live at the nature reserve, enjoying the company of Gary and the other staff. And although life at the nature preserve could be challenging at times, the lioness and her cub knew they always had friends who cared for them and protected them. The nature preserve became a safe and welcoming home for the lioness and her cub, a place where they could live in harmony with nature and enjoy the company of those who loved and respected them. And so the story of the lioness and her cub became one of the most beautiful and moving stories in the nature reserve, a story that demonstrated the importance of friendship, compassion, and respect between humans and animals.